What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Sports Religion YouTube channel. Tonight, we are going to be going over a full first round mock draft for this upcoming 2025 NFL draft. Only in a few short days. It's hard to believe that it's here already, but draft season is upon us. All the teams are looking to get exciting new young players to join their rosters. So, with that, let's get right into it. The Titans at 1. I think that we all know who's going to be targeted by the Tennessee Titans, and that's got to be Cam Ward. We've been talking about it for a while on this show. Actually, the first mock draft we did, I kind of called a smokescreen on the way things were being reported around the Titans, in that a lot of the players, that are generational, like Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, may have been being looked at by the front office, but you just can't go into next season with Will Levis as your only option at quarterback. And Cam Ward is just a dynamic playmaker, all the talent in the world, huge arm. I mean, you got to take your shot here and hope that you can bring winning football back to Nashville. At number 2, we have the Cleveland Browns. It could be interesting to see what the Browns do. Do they trade out? Do they take a quarterback? I think they personally go for Travis Hunter because he's the best player there. He's a generational guy. We've heard the general manager of the Browns, Andrew Berry, come out and say he loves what Travis can do on both sides of the ball. He fills needs at corner and receiver for the Browns. They need to get more dynamic at both of those positions. They need more playmakers on both sides of the ball. Travis can fit both of those roles. He's stated many times that he's going to try to play both sides of the ball in the NFL. I certainly hope he does, just because of the entertainment value of it all. And, I think that the Browns, with they possess a pretty high second round pick, so that means they can take another swing at quarterback there if they really want to. So, I mean, somebody's got to be behind Joe Flacco, because you got to have a plan after this year, unless they're tanking for somebody next year. But just there's no guarantee that you're going to get a quarterback next year who's going to be as good as what might be available now. So for that, I think, Travis Hunter is probably the best option for them and gives them a really nice playmaker going forward. So at 3, the Giants, I actually think they should trade out of this pick. And the team I think they should trade with would be the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners are in an interesting spot where, they still have a lot of their core guys who are there. It's an aging core, but they can still really win games with them. I think if you get the Niners trading up into this top kind of 5 or 6 picks here, I think that they would definitely look to do that, because in the past, John Lynch has really liked his blue chip players. You think of Nick Bosa at 2 overall. They took Eric Armstead at 7. They took DeForest Buckner, I think, at 14 overall. So they really love their blue chip players. And, even in free agency, they signed blue chip players that were drafted inside the top 10 that, weren't necessarily, they weren't able to draft the first go round. So I think the Niners would love to go back to their bread and butter, and that's, going up to get a really elite defensive player on, their defensive line. So we're just gonna force a trade here for the sake of the argument, but I think the Niners come up to 3 and get Abdul Carter, and that gives the Niners arguably probably the best pass rushing duo in the league. It just doesn't make any sense for me to keep the Giants there and take Abdul Carter when they have Kayvon Thibodeaux. Kayvon Thibodeaux, he's only 25 years old, and he was the 5th overall pick a few drafts ago. Why? I don't know why all this buzz is coming out that they should get rid of him and move on when he's still got plenty of playing time left on his career. And the guy gets injured for 1 season, and all the Giants fans want to get rid of him. I just don't really understand that. I think Kayvon's a great player, and his best football is still ahead of him. So I just don't think if you draft Abdul Carter as the Giants, how does that make you any better? You already have 2 elite pass rushers. What are you going to do? Have 3? All those guys have to eat at some point, and it's just I think it makes the Giants are in a better spot if they trade down, get some additional draft capital, and they're still trading down to 11. They'll have plenty of chances at one of the quarterbacks here too, because I think there's other teams that are going to look elsewhere. But either way, the Niners kind of go back to their bread and butter and, try to make an elite pass rush again. Because when they were at their best, their defensive line was unbelievable. It was just stifling teams, overpowering them in the run game and just winning in the pass. So I think that's a great move for the 49ers. They get arguably probably the best player in the draft. I think you know what you're getting with Abdul Carter. Unbelievable pass rusher. crazy bend around the edge. There's just not many like him. So with that, at 4, I think this one's pretty easy. I'm going to go Will Campbell here, just getting more protection for Drake May. I think Mike Vrabel would love Will Campbell on the team, and there's been a lot of reporting about how he views Will Campbell. Like, he believes he can go out there and start at tackle. They've said it several times. There's also a lot of buzz about them liking Armand Membu, the tackle from Missouri, as well. But to me, you got to go with Will Campbell and get Drake May, a proven offensive lineman. He started pretty much every game since he was a freshman at LSU, and I think he's just a stud for the New England Patriots up front. At 5, everybody's been penciling Mason Graham here automatically. I just don't think it's that sure of a shot, to be honest with you. Maybe with Trent Baalke being gone, they look elsewhere. I think the best player available is Ashton Jeanty. I mean, with the way the league is going, it's becoming a run-first league. And if you don't have one of those elite running backs, you may get left out. And so the Jaguars are in a spot where they really need to capitalize on Trevor Lawrence's youth and, his ability to be, the pressure needs to be taken off of him somehow. They need more people in that huddle to try to get yards and make big plays. So I'm going to go with Ashton Jeanty here. And, the Jaguars, they don't necessarily need a running back. They have, Travis Etienne there, but he's missed a ton of time. He's always hurt. And if you want a guy who's going to be dependable, great for the locker room, really good rusher, probably the best in this entire draft, no questions asked, you got to go Ashton Jeanty there. And, then they can establish some sort of consistent run game, takes all the pressure off Trevor Lawrence, and, just allows that team to breathe a little bit easier. Less pressure on the defense, too. You can possess the ball longer. So I think that's a great pick for the Jaguars. Nobody's really doing that in mock drafts, but I think there's a real possibility he could go there. At 6, we have the Raiders, who I would have loved to put Ashton Jeanty here, but we've also heard a lot of reports from the Raiders that they might look at Mason Graham, Jahdae Barron. So, I mean, somebody's doing a lot of reporting from inside the Raiders organization that may or may not be true or not, So I think a guy they should go with would be Mason Graham, because he's arguably, one of the top 3 or 4 players in this draft. He's a blue chip defensive lineman. I love him. He's a great player. He's going to be great in the NFL for probably 10, 12 years. And, you pair him with Christian Wilkins, Max Crosby up front, Malcolm Kuntz. That's a great front 7 for the Raiders, especially, with Pete Carroll being old-fashioned. He understands the value of a good defense and a good defensive line and what those guys can really do for a game. So I'm going to go with Mason Graham here, total game wrecker, and that Raiders front is going to look pretty scary next year. So at 7, we got the Jets here. I think that, this new regime in New York is a good thing. I think they're going to totally look at different players than, previous front offices might have looked for in the Jets. And I think, signing Justin Fields, that doesn't necessarily solve their long-term quarterback needs, but does give you a high upside player who, you kind of know what you're getting. He's a great rusher. He's developing as a passer still. So I just think the Jets should go Armand Membu here. He's the most athletic tackle in this class. He's just an unbelievable athlete. The tape, I think, is the best tape for a tackle in this draft. I love him. He's a great player. He played really well in the SEC for Missouri. And, he's got, he's a bit shorter than tackles usually are, but I think he's got all the foot speed in the world to survive in the NFL as a tackle and, even move around. And so if you get Armand Membu, then you have 2 great bookend tackles. I loved Olu Fashanu in the last draft, and they got him at 11, last year, and he looked pretty good his rookie season. So if you have Armand Membu and Olu Fashanu as your tackles, Joe Tippmann as your center, Elijah Vera Tucker as your guard, that's a great offensive line. And that's something that the Jets, their offensive line hasn't been good enough to win a Super Bowl the last 2 seasons. We saw it with the way things went with Aaron Rodgers. And, if they really want to protect Justin Fields and get the most out of him, you got to invest in the offensive line. I think Aaron Glenn would fully believe in that as well. He's a coach who just came from Detroit. He saw what Detroit had in that offensive line that they had and what it allowed them to do. Plus, New York has 2 really good running backs, Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. They're going to get all sorts of opportunities behind that really good offensive line. So at 8, we got the Panthers. I think that the Panthers would look one of 2 ways here. There's 2 players they would really take if they were to stay at 8. One's Jalen Walker and the other is James Pierce. For one reason, they have no playmakers in that front 7 besides Derek Brown. I mean, it's a pretty desolate front 7, and they just can't rush the passer at all. So I think they would look at those guys, because of that. But then also, both of these guys are from the North Carolina, South Carolina area. So I think that either one of these guys would love to come home and play for their hometown team. The Panthers really do value that. I mean, they traded into the first round to get Xavier Legette, obviously because of his attachment to being in that region. So I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't take one of these guys here. I'm leaning more towards Jalen Walker just because the hype for James Pierce has really died down quite a bit over the last couple weeks. It went from in the offseason being like he's a top 5 pick in this draft to he might not even, make it into the first round because of attitude concerns, technique concerns, all this stuff. So I think I would lead Jalen Walker here. But the other thing about this is their division rival, the Saints, pick right after them. I mean, how sweet would it be if the Panthers traded this pick to someone else who takes the quarterback that the Saints have been eyeing up? Could you maybe trade with a team like the Giants or somebody else who needs a quarterback who could maybe take, the quarterback that the Saints want? And I think that would feel pretty good for the Panthers front office if, say someone traded up for Jackson Dart, who we've heard a lot of buzz about going to the Saints. So for me, I mean, maybe the Giants trade up. It's kind of hard to decide with these quarterbacks. It's really hard to get a read on who might be interested in who. But I think for the sake of this, we'll just trade up with the Giants here. And, I'm not really caring too much about the compensation here. I just want to do a trade for the sake of the video. But I think that the Giants leapfrogging the Saints could go get their guy in either Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart. We've heard a lot about both of those guys going to New York. And, for me, I'm going to go with Jackson Dart here because there's a lot of reports saying that, Brian Daboll loves a running quarterback. He loves a tough quarterback. He loves an accurate quarterback. Jackson Dart's all those things. And then, in the process, the Panthers pretty much screw over the Saints because that could have been their guy. The Saints don't have a quarterback next year. Derek Carr, his future is uncertain, and he was pretty mid anyways, to be honest. So here at 9, the Saints are there. Maybe they trade out. Maybe they trade out of the 9th pick just because they don't feel like they can get a quarterback they want. But I think, if you're the Saints here, you absolutely got to look at quarterback because you just don't have a plan. And, for me, that guy would probably be Jalen Milroe. And I know people, I don't agree with him going this high either, but you just look at the talent that he has as a runner. It's unbelievable. And I think that Kellen Moore could really harness a guy like that and make him effective in this offense. And, I just don't know that they have the offensive line to protect a guy like Shedeur, who's used to dropping back 5 to 10 yards each time he passes downfield. Quite yet. They're still building that offensive line up, especially with Ryan Ramczyk retiring in the offseason. I just don't know that they have that pocket to let Shedeur develop and thrive in that system. So for me, I'd go Jalen Milroe. He's a lot, he's a bit more team friendly for the roster makeup that the Saints have than Shedeur is. So 10, the Bears. Unfortunately, they miss out on Ashton Jeanty, and that would just be unfair, honestly, if he fell to the Bears because they'd have so many weapons at their disposal. There would not be any more excuses left for the Bears if they were able to somehow get their hands on him. But instead, I think now the focus shifts to the defense. And, you got a guy like Walter Nolan here. They got to get better in the trenches. I know they made some free agency signings, but guys that they signed, I'm not necessarily too high on being impact guys in the NFL anymore. And Kenneth Grant is here as well. I think they have to look at one of these D linemen or edge rushers. And, so I think the better of the two D linemen that's left is Kenneth Grant. I mean, him and Mason Graham single-handedly won that game against Ohio State to close out the year and keep their streak against them alive. These guys are beasts in the middle, and I think they're the top 2 defensive linemen in the draft. So we'll back that up here. We already took Mason Graham to the Raiders earlier on. So why don't we take Kenneth Grant here? Then the Bears have a run-stuffing nose tackle in the middle of their defense who's super athletic, just a freak athlete for his size. You don't see many guys move the way he does at 340 pounds. And, I also kind of disagree with where I've been seeing him ranked. I think he's going to go a lot higher than people think because these interior defensive linemen are becoming so important with the way the league is going, being run first and all. You got to have the guys to stop those running teams. And I think a guy like Kenneth Grant is something the Bears don't have. He's an impact day one starter who makes their defensive line and team better. And, that also takes the pressure off of the offense. The offense isn't, trying to... the defense is able to back them up and get stops and get the ball back in Caleb Williams' hands. So I think it's a great pick for the Bears. 11, the Panthers. I'm going to go with one of the guys I talked about earlier because, they trade back. They get some additional capital from the Giants, whatever that may be. And, take Jalen Walker. He's a great Great player, hometown kid, and his dad was a football coach. Everybody always talks about how disciplined and how invested in the game he is because of the way he was brought up and taught things by his dad. And you just look at the way he played at Georgia. He plays with his hair on fire every snap, whether he's at a true linebacker position or out on the edge. I think he's got some work and refining to do of his skill set, but absolutely he could be an impact player for the Panthers. They don't have anything like that on their roster right now, and it just gives that front seven a bit of juice that they don't have right now. So the Cowboys at 12, this is kind of an interesting one. I mean, Ashton Genty's gone. I'd love to give them a running back. I don't know if they look at another receiver or not. It's kind of hard to tell. But I really think, Will Johnson's probably the best player left available. Maybe Jihad Campbell. I could honestly see Jihad Campbell going here because Matt Eberflus is taking over as the defensive coordinator, and he's a linebacker guy by trade. I think he was a linebacker coach for most of his career. So either of those guys I could honestly see. So I think I'm going to take Jihad Campbell here for the reason I said. He had the offseason shoulder surgery. We don't really know how that's going to impact his future quite yet. But I think that, you get a guy like that who's so intelligent. He's really good at, reading gaps and just firing downhill to stop the run. I think that's something the Cowboys are desperately missing. Their run defense was pretty bad last year. And then, there's a lot of upside here with him playing on the edge. I mean, he's kind of like Micah Parsons in that he could be that rover kind of player who moves around quite a bit. And I could absolutely see them dialing up packages where him and Micah Parsons are, elite pass rushers. So I like that pick to the Cowboys. That's a great player. You know what you're getting with Jihad Campbell, and, it makes their defense better as a whole. The Dolphins at 13 are an interesting one. I'm actually going to try to trade back here with a team that might want to come up and get Tyler Warren because I believe that the Colts would take Tyler Warren at 14, so the Dolphins could market this pick as, none of the guys we really see on our board are here, but you could take Tyler Warren if we give you your pick. So, which team would trade up for him? It's kind of up in the air to me. I mean, obviously, PFF thinks these three teams would. I could see the Commanders doing it. I mean, they have Zach Ertz, but I don't know who would really be interested in trading for, this pick to potentially go get a tight end. So I think I'm going to go with the Chargers because I can just only imagine the creative ways that, Jim Harbaugh would use Tyler Warren in an offense like this. I'm going to force the trade for the sake of this video, but I would love to see Tyler Warren in a Jim Harbaugh offense, another weapon for Justin Herbert, and all the unique ways they could use him in the run game as a blocker. I think that would be a great addition to the Chargers, and the Colts get robbed of a great player because I think he would make a difference on the Colts as well. But now for me, the shift turns back to somewhere in defense for the Colts. Where could they improve their secondary or their defensive line? And luckily, the two best corners outside of Travis Hunter are here. I think that, it all depends on what they like in their scheme. You kind of see they signed Charvarius Ward, earlier, so they have one outside corner. Would they want to go Will Johnson to have two outside corners? I think so. I'm going to take Will Johnson here. Before he got injured, this was a top 5 pick in the draft, and I don't really know why the hype's died down from him. Everybody seems to be really worried about his 40 time, his agility, all this stuff, which I get, but Will Johnson has been a phenomenal player since the day he walked onto the field in Ann Arbor, and he's unbelievable as a corner, takes everything away. He's got multiple high leverage pick sixes, and what I mean by that is big games, huge crowds. He gets the job done at corner, and it's arguably a great addition for the Colts because their secondary was a weakness last season, and the Indianapolis fans really wanted improvement in the secondary, and their front office didn't really do anything for them. So I like what they did in free agency to address the secondary, and adding Will Johnson just benefits that greatly. So the Falcons at 15, the easy thing to do here would be give them a pass rusher, but they've kind of expressed that they really like what they've done with their draft picks last year. They like Rook Orooro, the guy they drafted in the second round last year. They like Braylon Trice, who tore his ACL. Arnold Ebiketie they've gotten there. And, I don't know how motivated they're actually going to be to take a pass rusher here, even though their front seven, just isn't as good as many other teams. So I could honestly see this being a place where the first receiver comes off the board too, and to me that's Matthew Golden, just because of the way he ran at the 40, at the combine. His 40-yard dash time was elite. He's a great route runner. He gets open all the time, and I think the Falcons could use another receiver next to Drake London who can kind of be that shiftier guy who can, just take a lot of the pressure and the focus off of Drake London, because Kyle Pitts really hasn't turned into what they thought they were getting with where they drafted him either. So I really like that pick for the Falcons. And, I'm just kind of basing it off of what their front office has said about how they feel about some of their past picks. And if they feel that good about their front seven, they'd absolutely try to get their offense another weapon. So the Cardinals here at 16, I'm going to go with Walter Nolan here. Their defensive line just is not good enough. I mean, they drafted Darius Robinson last year, but didn't really see a whole lot of him, to be honest. He was hurt in and out of the lineup. So let's go with Walter Nolan, who is absolutely the best defensive lineman left. He's a freak athlete, holds the point really well, gets off the ball. He's a 5-star recruit out of high school, the best player in the entire country. We've all heard it before. So I think Walter Nolan to the Cardinals gives them something they don't have right now. The Bengals at 17 desperately need defense. They just keep signing offensive players in free agency and don't really seem to care about this defense at all. I mean, they did get TJ Slayton, which is a good upgrade on their defensive line, because they had no run defense last year at all. So I think, a guy they would look at here would be someone in the trenches, someone that can, fill a couple of gaps for them and just help their run defense. And I think a guy that could, even give them some pass rush upside opposite Trey Hendrickson would be Mykel Williams here. I mean, this guy stepped in at Georgia as an 18-year-old and was very effective as a pass rusher off the edge. He was only in a limited role because of how many great players Georgia's had on their defensive line over the last couple seasons. But when he was healthy, this was a dominant player. A lot of people said he was going to be the top, player taken in this draft if he was able to stay healthy all of last season. And I really like him as a player too, and that's just something that would give the Bengals a physical edge who you can move around the defensive line a bit as well. Like, we've seen him rush from the inside. He's a great run defender. You know what you're getting with him as a run defender. Not many guys can hang their hat on run defense as, something that they can back their pass rushing up with. Mykel Williams certainly can. It makes the Bengals defense better right away. He'll be a day one starter for them opposite Trey Hendrickson. So at 18, the Seahawks, could they take Ted McMillan as a replacement for DK Metcalf? Absolutely, but I think that their offensive line is more of a need, and I'm going to go interior with Tyler Booker. And Tyler Booker is not necessarily a player I would be considering a first-round talent, but he was invited to the NFL draft in Green Bay. So that shows you that teams are giving the NFL feedback that Tyler Booker is a first-round player and that somebody's looking at him in the first round. They don't invite those players for no reason. So I think a team like the Seahawks that just so desperately needs interior offensive line, I just don't see why they wouldn't take a guy like this, or maybe a tackle and move him interior. But that's a good spot for Tyler Booker. He'll start right away. He's an upgrade over whatever they have there now, to be honest with you. And I think that's a great fit. At 19, this one's really easy for me. I'm going Donovan Ezeraku. This is a Buccaneers type all day. They need an edge rusher opposite Yaya Diaby, and I could see Ezeraku being a Todd Bowles guy and just wanting to give his all for that defense and work with, guys like Levante David, Antoine Winfield on that defense just to be an elite unit. I love Donovan Ezeraku, really productive player at Boston College. Bill O'Brien, the head coach at Boston College, said there were games that he won for us this year just from impact plays that he made, like whether it's a strip sack or a stop on fourth down. Like when the head coach comes out and says your edge rusher is the reason you're winning games, that's a first-round player for me. He was a problem all year for tackles. I think this is absolutely the perfect fit for the Buccaneers, and it's definitely, it gives them an upgrade over what they have there now. So I think that's a great pick. At 20, the Broncos would have loved to have, maybe have them be in the Tyler Warren sweepstakes as well. I think he would have been a great fit there as well. So, but, is Colston Loveland the same caliber tight end? Maybe not all around, but he's definitely a better route runner than Tyler Warren is. Tyler Warren was used in really unique ways in that Penn State offense. They even had him throw the ball a few times. Like, that's just uncalled for as a tight end. So I think that Colston Loveland would be a great fit in this Broncos offense. Another pass catcher that, Bo Nix can throw to, up the seam in the slot, running unique routes for Sean Payton and just taking a lot of pressure off of Cortland Sutton on the outside. That a good tight end like this opens everything else up for the offense. So I think that's a great fit for the Broncos there. The Steelers at 21, this is where I'm going to have Shedeur Sanders go. It's a pretty big fall for him considering where the hype, for him started out. But I think the Steelers get their guy. They get a great quarterback who has unbelievable bloodlines. His dad's a Hall of Famer, great coach, and steps right in and kind of fits with what the Steelers could honestly be set up to do. They have two receivers that are just deep threats. DK Metcalf, George Pickens. They are just physical deep threat receivers, and if you don't have a quarterback to get the ball downfield, then you're kind of screwed, and your $150 million investment in DK Metcalf doesn't make any sense. That's why I just don't get at all why they even were interested in Aaron Rodgers, if that's even true, because that he just can't get the ball out in a time where it's just, you got to get the ball out fast to these guys, and I don't think Aaron Rodgers would be able to do that. Shedeur does. He's got two years of high-level tape at Colorado of finding receivers, picking defenses apart when he's able to have the time to do so, and, he's shown a lot of toughness. He's gotten hit a lot at Colorado, and the Steelers have a better offensive line than he'd have at Colorado, so I'd love to see Shedeur in a Steelers uniform working with Mike Tomlin. I think that's a great fit there, and it's just part of the unpredictability of these quarterbacks. We don't really know where they're going to end up going, but I think there's a good chance Shedeur could slide all the way to 21. So 22, the Dolphins here again. I'm actually going to make them trade back again with the Detroit Lions because I think that, a team like the Lions, they see who's picking next. They see that Green Bay's picking next, and they want to snipe a player that Green Bay might be interested in so that their division rival can't get him. So I'm going to force this trade as well and get the Lions up to 22. And the player I'm going to take for the Lions is Derek Harmon. Phenomenal defensive lineman with Oregon. We've talked about him many times on this show. He's from the Detroit area. He initially played at Michigan State before transferring to Oregon and furthering his career. And I think that the Lions would love a dog like this on their defensive line, especially with all the injuries they had last year. They've still got guys in that room recovering from injuries that happened so late in the season. So I think you got to go trenches here. Derek Harmon is a player the Green Bay Packers have had in on several visits and have been doing work on. So I think the Lions could see that and go, we want to take away a great player from our division rival. It just makes all the sense to me. Great fit, total Dan Campbell guy. Would fit in, perfectly with their scheme as well. Give you pass rush and run defense upside. So for me at 23, I'm going to break the streak of not taking a receiver and take Tetairoa McMillan. I mean, in the video we did earlier for the Packers where I kind of predicted their top 50, I had him as the number one player on the Packers board because I just believe that there's not really a guy like this with these physical traits at receiver who moves this well, who has this good of hands, has got these physical traits, to go up and get a ball. Like these aren't 50-50 balls that go his way. They're more like 75-25 in his favor. And the Packers just go up and get an alpha receiver here. They don't even have to trade up in the draft. And they've been doing a lot of work on him too. I mean, Brian Gutekunst went to his pro day and has had him in for several visits. So I think if Tetairoa McMillan is here, he's absolutely going to be a Green Bay Packer. They'd run that card in so fast, and he would give Jordan Love a bona fide number one receiver. At 24, with the Vikings, I'm going to go with Malachi Starks just because the Vikings are pretty, they're pretty consensus-oriented with their draft picks. They really like taking, the flashiest, fastest, best skill position player available, even if it means ignoring other needs. But I think Malachi Starks is the best safety in this draft. And, Harrison Smith, I hate to say it, but he's getting up there in age, and he's been an awesome player to watch in the NFC North for the last decade. But, it's time to usher in a new generation of safeties back there, and you get the best one in the draft to replace him. I think that's a win for the Vikings. I think that, putting him and Brian Flores' defense next to Josh Metellus, that's a great safety duo for the next 4 or 5 years that you can have. So that's a great pick for them. 25, the Texans just don't have anybody that really makes me feel good about CJ Stroud on the offensive line. So I'm going to go with Kelvin Banks here. Kelvin Banks is easily, the best offensive lineman remaining. I think he's a top 15 player in this draft. There were a lot of concerns about his arm length, but when you look at his measurables, he's actually got a huge wingspan. It's just the way he's built. He's got really long shoulders as well, which kind of contributes to that huge wingspan. But I don't really have any concerns about that because of the tape he put out at Texas. He's shut down numerous high-level pass rushers throughout his career and really is a disciplined player, doesn't commit a lot of penalties. And, that gives the Texans a franchise tackle that they just don't really have on their line right now. Because if they want to win a Super Bowl, their offensive line's not going to get them there. It's really bad, and I just don't really see players that I like across the board on their offensive line outside of maybe Jarrett Patterson at right tackle. I don't really know what they're going to do there or what their plan is. But if Kelvin Banks is here, you really can't run the card in fast enough to get him. At 26, the Rams, I think, have done a really nice job in the draft the last few seasons, put themselves in a great position. They could be a sneaky option for a quarterback that falls, to be honest with you, if they want someone behind Matthew Stafford. But I think a guy that they should go with, personally, is Jahdae Barron. And, this is a guy who can play at multiple different areas around the secondary, plays a little bit of safety sometimes, and a really good slot defender. And it just gives them a young corner, versatile chess piece for Sean McVay's staff to work with. And, the Rams do it again. They get another phenomenal player fall to them in the draft without even, having to trade up or trade capital for. So I love that pick for the Rams. 27, the Ravens. I'm going to go with Mike Green here. He's the best pass rusher available. I think the Ravens need a little bit more help there in that room. There were a lot of offseason questions with Mike Green. I'm not going to go into detail about him because we're here to judge the players from their actions on the field, not what they do outside of playing the game. But I think Mike Green is a great player. He had 17 sacks last year at Marshall, which is just unheard of. Easily leads this edge rush class in, productivity. But, the biggest question is that level of competition with the Thundering Herd. Is it as good as the rest of the Power 5? No, absolutely not. So you got some questions to answer there with Mike Green on and off the field, but I think he gives you elite pass rush upside. He's got a pass rush plan already built in. He knows how to counter really well. He's got some chop moves. He's got power moves. He's got it all for the Ravens there, and I really like that fit as well. So finally we get to the Dolphins after I've moved them down twice, and they're another one that really needs help on their offensive line, but they continue to ignore it year in and year out. And I don't know if that'll continue or not, or if they'll kind of say, hey, yeah, our draft strategy was wrong in the past. We got to look at some of these other guys here on the offensive line. So, we kind of have Josh Connerly, Gray Zabel, Josh Simmons here. It's got to be one of those three guys. Josh Simmons is recovering from a torn patellar tendon. That's a huge injury, and I don't know if you want a guy like that to be on your team recovering from an injury, that of that magnitude. So for me, I'd kind of look for Gray Zabel or Josh Connerly to be the pick here. I really like Gray Zabel a lot. He played at North Dakota State, which, might throw some red flags, but North Dakota State is a winning program. They've shown they can compete with, teams at the FBS level many times, and I don't know why people really have reservations about that. I think he had a great game against Arizona a few seasons ago where he looked really good, and he played Colorado this last season and looked really good. I know Colorado didn't really have elite pass rushers or anything, but it's still important that you hold up against stronger competition, if you will, teams that are considered to be out of your league. So I think Gray Zabel is the best fit for the Dolphins there. And, you get a brawler in the run game, too. That's a physical downhill guy, and I think that fits a really big need for the Dolphins. At 29, the Commanders, I could see a few different things happening here. They really do need some pass rush help, so maybe they look at Shamar Stewart. But, I also like the idea of Omarion Hampton here. I'm not a huge fan of Brian Robinson, to be honest with you. I just kind of think the only yards he gets are the ones that are blocked out for him. And, he doesn't really make guys miss after the play. He's a solid overall running back, but I want a true ace to go along with Jaden Daniels. And to me, that would be Omarion Hampton. I love him. He's a great player. There were a lot of questions about how his production would be impacted by the departure of Drake May last year, and he ended up backing it up with even more yards than he had when Drake May was there to take a lot of the pressure off of him. So I think Omarion Hampton has all the traits of a workhorse back, and the Commanders get their franchise running back here. The Bills at 30, I'm going to go with Emeka Egbuka just because I want more receiving options for Josh Allen. Khalil Shakir is a really nice player. Keon Coleman's, I think, on his way to being a really good player as well, but I want to keep adding to that with a known commodity, and that's Emeka Egbuka. He's got the highest floor of any receiver in this draft. You know what he is. He runs crisp routes. He's got great hands. He doesn't drop passes. He's a great leader for that that team, that Ohio State team. He's been a part of some great receiving rooms, and he stuck it out. He stuck around, waited for his turn, and, backed it up with his play on the field. So I think that's a great pick for the Bills. Get another weapon for Josh Allen. He reminds me a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown, not overly dominating physical profile, but just he gets open, has strong hands, and he's physical too. Those are all great traits to have as a receiver. So the Chiefs at 31, to me, they back themselves into a corner in just needing to take an offensive lineman. And I think they got to take either Josh Simmons or Josh Connerly here. And, Josh Simmons is probably the better player, but Josh Connerly might be the more consistent and healthier guy. So which one of those would they take? I'm going to take Josh Simmons just because, he's put better film on tape, I'd say, than Josh Connerly has. And he's invited to the draft. We've already talked about how those players invited to the draft, that kind of means they're going in the first round. So I think the Chiefs could get Josh Simmons there. And if he can recover and be what he was before the injury, he's a franchise tackle for them. And we all saw it in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs do not have the offensive line that they can rely on anymore. So I think this is a great pick for them. At 32 with the Eagles, this is kind of a pick, almost a luxury pick for them because of just how elite their roster is. And, a guy I'm going to go with here is someone who I have been talking about should be in the first round for a long time, and that's Nick Emmanwori. The safety out of South Carolina, just unbelievable athlete. He had a 10 relative athletic score, which is the highest you could get. And he was easily the most athletic safety to ever test at the combine. And, not many guys move like he does at 6'3" and are able to keep up with the receivers that he's kept up with at his time, down there in South Carolina. And, he had a couple pick sixes last year that were just absolutely electrifying plays. And I love him as a player. I think he's a first-round talent. He's a productive player, which there's not many of in this draft, to be frank. There's just not many productive guys, in this class. It's a lot of either traits, you're kind of gambling on the traits, or the productive guys are just smaller. They don't have first-round traits. So I'm going to go with Nick Emmanwori. Fills a void on the Eagles, to be honest with you, with C.J. Gardner-Johnson going away. Being traded to the Texans. So I think that's a versatile safety that they can move around in that Fangio defense. And, he'll look really good against, teams that have dominant tight ends because he could keep up with tight ends and kind of flip his hips and, follow him stride for stride. So, yeah, with that, that's kind of the review of this draft, how I think it's going to go. To me, this is the most unpredictable draft I've been following in a long time. There's just really no consensus on the players outside of the top 6 or 7 guys. And so that's going to make for a really interesting draft night, and everyone should be tuned in to see what happens because we really don't know what teams think of a lot of these guys. Picks 8 through 50 are kind of all the same to me, to be honest. A lot of similar caliber players, and, it's just there's not as many blue chip guys. It's a very trench heavy draft, a lot of linemen and edge rushers and running backs. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. Thanks for tuning in this draft season. It's kind of like Christmas in April, watching these teams get all these new players. And, we'll see what happens. Thanks for tuning in.